All right, so let's review the upper intermediate challenge. I'm going to skip questions number 1 and 2 because these were about hooks. If we have time, I'll go back to that later on. Someone trying to join Hangouts? Maybe not. Okay, so yep. So question number, where I am, guys, sorry, it's a bit confusing. So that was question number 2. Now I would like to start from question number 3. Eurovision contest is back. That question is fairly interesting because let's try to understand what's going on. So we got a component called Eurovision results. Fine, no problem at all. Then that component has 2 components. You see, that component could render a component called loading and could render another component called results. So the idea is when we render the Eurovision results component, by the way, Eurovision contest I think has been cancelled this year. So if you are a Eurovision fan, I think bad news for you. But anyway, so by default the component will display some sort of loading results, yeah, and then after half a second, you see, I wait, blah, 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 after half a second, then we're going to present the results of the last Eurovision contest, yeah, something like that. Cool. We got a class component, so let's follow the classic steps when dealing with the class component, the constructor, super, render, yeah. As you can see, I'm preparing the skeleton of the exercise. We have 2 components, loading and results. So we will render one or the other depending on the circumstances. Let me prepare them. Function loading, return something, and then we got function results, I think. That will return something else, right? Loading and results, exactly. So that's pretty much the plan. Yep, cool. So now, here we need to deal with a state. By default, the state will be loading. Yeah? We are loading results, so we want to render the loading component, and then after half a second, we would like to change to the results component. So let's initialize the state. This.state equals, I don't know, loading. What should be the default value of loading, guys? True or false? True, correct, because by default we want to show the spinner or the loading message, yeah? And now, can anybody tell me, I want to render either loading or results depending on the value of loading. So in other words, I want to manage the situation using a ternary. So can anybody tell me how can I write the ternary operator in the return statement? So loading question mark, and then what else, Minji? Okay, so I think Panos is suggesting that we need to add a prefix, and I think Adam agrees on that. So they are suggesting to add this dot state. Yeah, that's correct, Minji. They are right, yeah, because loading only makes sense as part of the state. This does the state of loading. Then what, guys? That? What else? That's controversial. The parentheses. Guys, render. This is HTML, JSX, right? Is that the way you deal? So loading. This is a React component, right? And results. Sorry about that. Results is also React component. So how do you display React components in React? The HTML tags. That's correct, Panos. That's absolutely correct. Yep. You see? So if the state is loading, then render the loading results. What the loading results does, I don't know. Displaying loading results, ... Fantastic. Let's do that. Loading results, ... And then the results, 1 Israel, 2 Cyprus, 1 Israel to Cyprus, free, whatever, Israel to Cyprus 436, Austria to Cyprus 436, and free Austria. What's the score for Austria? I don't know. Give me a second. Free Austria 342. Correct, 342. Thank you, Minji. I think with a P, right? Something like that. Cool, fantastic. So that's pretty much it. So loading component is okay, results component is okay. We definitely managed to decide which one do we want to display. But now the problem is, if we run that, let's evaluate it. Obviously that won't work because, you know, the result will always be loading results, yeah? Because loading is always true. That's why after half a second, we are still displaying the loading. You see, after half a second, then get loading exists should be false. That means that component shouldn't exist anymore. However, we're still displaying it. That's not correct. That's not correct. So, can anybody tell me how can we change the state of loading flag from true to false after half a second? Set timeout. Fantastic. I like that. I like that, Panos. But set timeout where? Yeah, that's correct. That's correct. I think about that was Ian. He's right. Yeah, we need to do that on the component did mount because that method runs once and only once after the component has been rendered by the first time. And now he said Panos set timeout, and then after half a second, remember guys. So can anybody tell me how do I update the state? State? Aha, set the state, correct. What else? Yep, correct. False, right? Cool, that looks super sexy to me. So let's recap. So we got the constructor, we initialize loading to true. Then on the render, is loading enabled? Yes, value is true. You remember what we did yesterday about Boolean algebra, guys? This is not the state of loading. This is true. True is obviously truthy, so then we return loading. However, after the loading message is displayed, we go to the component in mount, and then we wait half a second, and after half a second, we call set state. Because we call set state, remember guys, every time you call set state, you re-render. That means that we'll invoke the render function again. Now, this state of loading is false. False is falsy, so we will jump to the else block, and that means we'll display the results. Let's see if it works. Confetti time, yeah? So that's correct. Do you have any questions, guys? Yes. That's a good question. Yes. Yeah. That's a good question, Adam. Yes. So when you see wrapper.find, you see loading, you see it starts with capital L. You see? That means you are expected to create a component with name loading. And then the second one is a bit more confusing because it's the same, results with capital R. However, it's surrounded by quotes. So that's a bit confusing. Why we're using different syntax? We did that on purpose, guys, because when using React testing, we'll talk a bit more about testing within the next few weeks. You will see that there are different ways of testing the same thing. So that should give you some sort of resilience towards problem solving. Yeah. So these two lines are equivalent. So when you find a component with React, you can either find it just passing the component name loading, or find it using the component name surrounded by quotes, obviously single or double quotes. Yes. Do you want me to send it? Yeah, yeah, yeah. Thanks. Yeah, definitely, definitely. Let me. Sorry, guys. Let me send you the code. Thanks for the reminder, Panos, because otherwise, so it happens. I think the last week, right? I tried to send it too late, and then it didn't work. So let me please send it to you on Slack right now, so then you can play with it, of course, at any time. Sorry, guys, my laptop is a bit small. Sorry, slow with all the streaming and recording and everything. Yeah, but. All right, so you got the snippet on the general channel. That's all right. One more thing, guys. So whenever you came across that sort of easy or simplistic functions in React that just return something, there is a different way you can write them. You can write a lambda function. If you've done a bit of Python, so you can create the component using a constant. So I'm going to rewrite the loading function. Look. Oops. You see, that line of code, loading equals function loading results, is equivalent to the next 3 lines. That's a new way of creating functions in JavaScript. Yeah? This is a variable called loading, so the variable will immediately return a message, as you can see. Yeah? So feel free to select whichever you prefer. Obviously, the long function one is more sophisticated because you can do whatever you want before returning. Yeah, with the lambda function, with the variable function, you know, with after the arrow, as you already know because of find, filter, etc., you just return the string. And let me run it just to see, just to prove that it works. Let's wait for some confetti time. Here we go. We got confetti time, so that means it works. Cool. Anything else, guys? Yes. Correct. Exactly. Yeah. That's correct, Adam. Because whatever you put after the arrow function, it's returned. I mean, technically speaking, this is the same as find and filter. Technically speaking, you can put the curly braces. You can do that. Yeah. You remember find, filter, map for each, reduce. It's the same. After arrow function, if you put curly braces, you can do whatever you want. Yeah. With the return statement at the end. Or if you don't want to do anything, if you just want to return something immediately, remember, remove curly braces, remove return statement, and move everything to the single line. Yeah. I agree with you. At least when talking about simplistic things. Yeah? When you get a simple function, loading, you just want to return a message. You can, of course, do some HTML here if you want. That's absolutely fine. But once again, it's something you want to return immediately. You cannot create any variable. You cannot do map. You cannot do for each. You call the function and then you return something, and that's it. That's a good question. Yes, you should be able to use let. Yeah. We'll do a workshop. I think it's next week. No, it's not next week. I think in a couple of weeks' time we'll do a workshop to understand the differences between let, const, and var. But for the time being, I think so. You should be able to use. Here you go. You should be able to use let as well. No problem. Anything else, guys? No? Cool. Thank you. Let's do question number 3. Number 4. I'm not going to review questions number 1 and 2 because on Wednesday we'll talk about hooks. I will explain how hooks work, and then if you want, we can solve questions number 1 and 2 at that time. So question number 4, resetting user's password. This question is very, 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 very similar. Very similar. We have a component called reset password. and let's try to understand it. The reset password has a couple of input fields. First of all, input type emails. This is a classic input where users type their email address. And finally, we got a button. So look, disable. Disable is an HTML flag. So essentially, we want to be able to interact with these fields, input and button. So we want to be able to play with them. However, once we click on the submit button, we want to disable them. Yeah, this is a classic use case scenario. When you sign up into any web platform, when you click on the sign up button, it may take few seconds to manage your request. Or when you do online shopping, the same thing. When you pay what you are buying, it may take some seconds to proceed your request, right? During that time, the submit button gets disabled because obviously they want to prevent you from buying the same stuff twice by accident. Yeah, you get the point. So we want to disable both input and button fields, and after half a second, you see again we got our friend the set timeout. After half a second, we are simulating that the transactions got completed. So then we want to enable the form again. Alright, so once again we got the class, so let's create the constructor, and now after the constructor, super, you see I'm just preparing the skeleton of the exercise. We'll look after the details in a minute. And what else? So we have a div, and as part of the div we have an input type email. Then we have a button, and then the button will have some text. Probably this is completely random. The text is not checking the content of the button. Can you guys tell me what's the specificity value associated to the button? Correct. It's 1 because that's a tag. And what's the specificity value associated to the input selector? Wrong. It's not 2. Wrong. It's not 1. 10 is not correct. Aha. That's correct, guys. That's correct. You got first of all the tag selector, same as the button, right? The tag selector specificity 1. Yep. Plus we got a second selector, type email. That's an attribute selector, as you said. Attribute, correct. Yeah, the attribute selector got specificity 10. So it's 1 plus 10 equal 11. Yeah? It's good to refresh these things from time to time. And this is one of the aspects that in a job interview, even if they don't ask you about what's the specificity associated to a selector, it's one of these things that if you talk about that during the interview, it's a good way to impress the employer because they are not expecting you to know these things necessarily. All right, so we got the button, we got an input. Then we got the disable attribute. We'll see what to do with it in a minute. Disable. All right, so I'm going to prepare this state. This.state equals disable. What's the default value of the disable attribute, guys? By default, are the input fields disabled or not? No, because we want to be able to submit the form, right? Okay, so, and now the question is, how do we bind with that disable attribute here? Like that? Like that? Correct, Adam. Disable equals it. Do we need a disable? What do you mean? You want to get rid of the disable of the key? No. Yes. No. That won't work, Panos, because this.state is an object, and the disable key only accepts a boolean, true or false. Yeah. Do you remember, guys, on the first day probably we said that this is HTML, but there are some subtle differences. So I'm going to show you something a bit exotic, something not obvious that many people don't know. So if you know it of HTML, you know you can do that. Yeah, this is valid in HTML. However, this is not HTML valid. You cannot pass a value on the disable attribute in HTML. Don't ask me why. To me, that doesn't make any sense. If you add the disable tag, the field will become disabled, regardless of whether the value is true, false, or Brexit, which is a bit weird. Yeah, hope you agree with me. That's a bit weird. Thankfully, React has changed that, and with React, you can customize the behavior. So disable now accepts a value, and of course, if the value is truthy, the field will become disabled, and if the value is falsy, the field will become enabled. Yeah. So that's pretty much it. So now let's do the same thing with the button. I hope you agree with me. It's a bit exhausting to type this.state.disable all the time. So let's destructure it. Can you tell me how to destructure the disable attribute? Yep. Fantastic, Ninji. That's it. You see? That's beautiful. That's fantastic. Why? Because by doing that, I don't have to type this.state twice. And the code, the HTML part becomes much simpler. Yeah? So what we do here is we are creating a new variable, disable. And what's the value associated to the disable value? The value is this.state.disable. Yeah? That's a beautiful way of simplifying your code. And this is one of the things that, regardless of what you do in a job interview, it's very easy that you'll come across a similar problem. Yeah. So try to destructure your variables as much as possible. First of all, because that's a good technique, and then because it's a way to easily impress the employer. Cool. Okay. So yeah, I mean, that won't work, right? If we write that code, the problem is, by default, it should be okay, but eventually, you see, after clicking on the button, the disable attribute is still false. So we are not disabling the fields effectively. So, can anybody tell me what do I have to do next? Set the state. Oh, fantastic. Where? Component did mount. Are you sure, guys? Please pay attention to the description of the exercise. I like that. Minji. You see, guys, we are expected to click on the button. So in this particular case, we don't care about component did mount because the state change will trigger only after we click on the button. On click what? We can create a function, right? Like submit, for instance. Yeah. So how do we bind it? Set the state like that. Okay, so you want me to type submit like that? No? Submit parentheses like that? That's brilliant, Panos. Remember, guys? Yes. Correct. Fantastic. Remember, guys, this is one of the reasons why class components are controversial, because some particular aspects are a bit tricky. To me, that on-click attribute, the syntax is a bit tricky. Yeah? And that's why hooks will deal with that in a smarter way. But we'll talk about hooks on Wednesday. So for now, there are two options, guys. Remember, well, there are more than two. There are 4 or 5 options. But two of the most popular ones is, first of all, doing that. So this is what Pano suggested. That's absolutely correct. Option B is you do that. Remember, don't call the function. If you call the function, you're fucked, guys. Because if you call the function, you will be creating an infinite loop. Do you remember the infinite loop? So never call the function, just create a reference. And now, on the function, you need to change the syntax a bit. Yeah, that's, once again, that's controversial. On the last week of the bootcamp, on week number 8, we'll talk more about how was the reasoning behind lexical this, which has been a nightmare for developers since 1995. Cool. So let's keep it as simple as possible. So let's follow Pano's approach. And now, I want to do two things, guys, and you are going to tell me how to proceed. First of all, I want to immediately, as soon as I click on the button, I want to change the state from false to true. And then half a second later, I want to bring it back. I want to enable it again. So you tell me, guys, what do I have to type here? Mm-hmm. Fantastic. That's great, Panos. Can anyone take it from there? Correct. Fantastic. So we got Adam, we got Panos. I would like to listen to hear from Minji, Ebrima, Daniel, or Ian. What else? After half a second, I want to revert that change. I want to bring the disable flag back to false. Set timeout. What else? Remember the syntax, guys. That's a function. So that receives a function. This what? Correct. Disable false. So now my question. This is a question just for. Yeah. Sorry. Wait, guys. I know that working with the pajama is very exciting, but you have to relax a bit. Question for Ebrima or Ian. I didn't hear them much today. So what else is? You don't think Ebrima was in before? So did he leave? Oh, maybe he left. What about Ian? Are you still alive? Fantastic. So Ian, is that code correct? Correct. Where do we pass the time, Ian? Here, right? Correct. Half a second. Okay, fantastic. So unless I miss anything, that should work. Let's have a look. Correct. We got confetti time. Yeah, so that's correct. Let me give you a couple of improvement points. Even though the code is correct, the first one, the obvious one, you see the button line is very large. Yeah, so make sure, guys, you move things a bit, yes, to avoid getting any penalty because of passing that vertical line on the right hand side. Also remember to use double quotes. You will see I'm unfortunate to use single quotes so many times that I tend to fail, and I tend to write single quotes here on the HTML attributes. And one more thing. I'm not sure if we talk about that. I don't think we've covered that already, but if we've done that, please let me know. So you see that I have a div surrounding my input and my button. Can I get rid of that parent div, guys? Can I do that? Why not? Correct. That's correct, guys. Remember, on every React component, we need a single root element. However, is there a way to optimize that? Yes, that's that's correct. Does anyone remember the name for this empty tag? That's correct, Ian. That's a fragment. That's a fragment. That's not valid in HTML, but that is valid in React, in JSX. Yeah. So what that means is we have an empty tag. That means that this is not going to be rendered. So we are saving one div. And you may be thinking, oh, but what's the problem of having one div on the HTML? Well, having one div is not a problem. But eventually, complex applications have thousands of divs. And then you have serious problem. Even at Codery, you may have noticed that sometimes we apply transitions when you move from, for instance, from training to challenges. You know, when you navigate through the Codery platform, we sometimes slide the exiting view. And sometimes this animation is quite smooth, but sometimes this animation is quite laggy. And that's because the number of DOM elements, the number of divs we got on the screen. So guys, try to optimize, try to economize the number of divs you got on the screen. Sometimes you need a div, fantastic, you displayed. But whenever divs are unnecessary, please try to get rid of them. Anything else? Any questions? That's correct. Yeah, absolutely, Minji. If you want to return a single element, imagine that I just want to return a div. Then just do return div. Yeah, you don't need the empty fragment. The empty fragment only makes sense when you want to return multiple root elements. In this particular case, I got two root elements, my input and the button. So then I'm forced to surround them with the empty tag or the fragment. Anything else? Guys, anything else? No, fantastic. Thank you. I just shared the answer on Slack as well, so you can review it if you want afterwards. So last question, number 5, and then we'll leave it here. On question number 5, it's a completely different topic. So in this particular case, we don't have any state, we don't have any set timeout, any click, anything like that. But we got a different question about dealing with a select. What is it? Here you go. We got a select input. You know, select is this classic drop down, like I don't know, select your favorite fruit. Yeah, actually that's the question. Select your favorite fruit, apple, orange. Yeah, you click on the drop down, you get a list of options, you select an option, and then it gets selected. Yeah, I think that's fairly simple. So fruit picker. You see, I got a single select element with some options, apple and orange. So let's start creating our selector. So select is an HTML tag, by the way. So there is nothing particular about React. Oh, sorry. What, guys? Why this code doesn't make sense? Why there are so many red lines around? Absolutely, Ian. We need the render function. By the way, sometimes I'm referring to you, Ian, but maybe that wasn't Ian. That was Panos or someone else, right? So, guys, apologies if I fail. I'm sure that wasn't Minji. That's the only thing I know. Okay, cool. So we got the select. We got option. Yeah, option is essentially the list of options. Yeah. So once again, there is nothing specific about React. This is just HTML valid code. So we got the apple and we got the orange I mean, this is pretty much it. That won't work, but let's run it. Let's see what happens. If I evaluate that code, you see, first of all, you see the options bit is okay. So we managed to declare 2 options. That's fantastic. However, guys, please let's have a look to the highlighted error. Expected undefined to equal Apple. Yeah, so the default get selector, so the default value should be the Apple. And then how can we solve the problem? You may be thinking, all right, so can I do that? You see, when you pass a value attribute, then you're specifying what's the selected element, what's the default element on the input, on the select. And look at what happened. I mean, now that line that was wrong, now is right. But the problem is, after manually clicking on the combo box, on the dropdown to select the orange instead of the apple, now the code is wrong because visually speaking, we haven't actually changed the input. Apple is still the selected one. And the problem is, we are not capturing any change on the select. Does anybody know how can I capture changes on the select field? Fantastic, Panos. On change. And now you want to what? Sorry. Yeah, you don't need that. I don't think. No, I get your point. Sometimes it's a good idea to have a value or an ID on the options, but regarding this exercise, I don't think you need it because React is smart enough to pass the text, to pass the apple, to pass the orange. Yeah, but you need to be careful. Yeah. Correct. So in HTML, you will do something like that, yeah? Apple. But you need to be careful because as far as I remember, Panos, in HTML, you don't have a value attribute. You have something called selected. So there are some subtle differences between HTML and JSX here, unfortunately. Cool, on change. So I want to create another method called update, or maybe if you want select fruit. Yep. And now, so how do we call the select fruit method here? Like that? No, you're wrong, because well, that's the first thing. That's correct. We need this. That's the first thing. That parentheses now are correct because now we are adding this arrow function on the left. So that means that if that arrow function is not invoked, our function won't be invoked neither. So now that piece of code is correct. But now the problem is, what do we do on this select fruit method? We want to update the state. Well, we want to update the state, right? But first of all, where is the state? We don't have any state, so let's create some state. Constructor, super, and then this dot state equals, I don't know, selected. By default, what's the selected fruit, guys? By default, correct, apple. Yeah, that's the default. And also, here instead of value, instead of hard coding the apple, we pass this dot state dot selected. Yeah, for now. So now, what do we do here? Like that. That's correct. That's correct. Selected orange. That's highly controversial, Adam. First of all, let's see if it works. Yeah. First things first. Does it work? You get confetti time. So technically speaking, you solve the problem. Can anyone tell me? Imagine that you're in a job interview and they present you this algorithm and they tell you, hey, Our colleague has done this exercise. It works. What do you think about it? What will be your thoughts about this piece of code? That's correct, Adam. That's correct. By default, yeah, that's correct. By default, it works well. Yeah, by default, you got the apple selected, which is what we got. Fantastic. Then, when you select the orange, it works. Yeah, because we got the orange. But what happens if the user changes their mind and they want now to select the apple back? They can't. They can't, because when they change the value, orange will persist forever. Yeah. So we don't want to hard code that. We don't want to select the orange. We want to select whatever the user has selected. Look at that line. Get selector. Yeah, here we are telling the fruit we want to select. The way that works is when you have an on-click event, you don't care about anything. You trigger the event, you fire the event, and you take your action. Fantastic. However, when dealing with inputs like select, like inputs, we still care about what the user is dealing with. When you have an input email, we want to capture the email of the user. We have a password, we want to capture the password of the user. I think that makes sense, right? How do we do that? Well, all these events on change, on click, on mouse enter, blah, 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 all these events have an event. Yeah? So let's pass the event here, and then let's pass the event to the function. Yeah? And obviously, now we got the event here as well. So now the way we can capture the value the user has typed or has selected is, and that's a standard, guys, in JavaScript, so that has nothing to do with React, is e.target.value. e.target.value holds the information provided by the user. Actually, if you pay attention, this second argument is the e, is the event. Yeah? Event.target.value. This is telling us the option the user has selected. In other words, instead of selected, we have to type e.target.value. That's the way it works. Let's see if it actually passes the test or not. Yeah, that's the way it works. So, questions? Yeah. That's a good question. I believe, Ian, on the on-click event, e.target.value doesn't make any sense. However, you get other valuable information. Imagine that because of whatever reason, we want to capture the exact pixel where the user has clicked inside of the button. Yeah, so we could find that information. So definitely the event holds many details about the user action. But when talking about the value itself, that's a really good question, Ian. It doesn't make sense when talking about buttons. It does make sense when talking about combo boxes. It makes sense when talking about inputs, what the text the user has typed, but it doesn't make sense when talking about buttons. What else? Any questions, guys? Okay, so let's do something. I'm going to share this snippet. on the Slack so you can read it carefully, you can try to understand it, and then if you got questions, you drop me either to me or to Stefan a message on Slack. By the way, guys, once again, be careful with this vertical line, so we don't want to get any penalties. So remember to add one attribute per line. And now, one more thing. Can we destructure the E? Can we destructure the event? Can I, for instance, guys, can I do that? Hello? All right. I'll tell you, yes, of course, I can do that. Yeah, I mean, that's the same thing. Instead of the event, I want to access the target property of the event. Yeah. And also, can I read the structure? Can I access the value directly? I mean, I know this is a bit more advanced, yeah? So take it easy. Take it easy. I don't really mind if you don't fully understand that. What if can I destructure and destructure again? Yes. Look. You see? I don't want to access the target. I want to access the value. Yeah. Even smarter. And then can I rename the destructure variable? Can I rename the value? Yes. Look. You see, I want to access e.target.value, but in reality, I want to assign the value to a new property called selected. And you may be asking, why the hell you are doing that? Because now I can do that. And you know why I'm doing that? Let me show you the final tip of the day. Whenever you get an object, imagine that I got to let name equals Peter, yeah? And then I create an object called user name. You get my point? I create an object user and I have a key called name, and the value associated to that key is another variable called name. Whenever you get an object and any key and values are the same, name and name, you see, are the same, there is a new property in JavaScript called object shorthand. And with object shorthand, I'll type it, you can essentially merge them like that. So curly braces name is the same as curly braces name colon name. Yeah. So why I'm doing that? Because if I got selected colon selected, I can simplify like that. And if I run it, you see the code still works. Yeah. So that will be one of the most complex destructuring techniques you can think about. Yeah. Because we are destructuring twice. We destructure the event into target. We destructure the target into value. And on top of that, we reassign the value into a new variable called selected. So then I can use object shorthand to simplify key and value into a single property. Where did the target? That comes from JavaScript, Minji. That's automatic. Come from the event. You see that E, you can rename it to event. You can do whatever you want. That's just the argument, Minji. Or you can call it Minji if you want. Yeah, it doesn't really matter. So this event is offered by JavaScript. And that object contains many details about the user interaction, including what the user has typed or has selected if it's a combo box. How do you find what the user has selected? e.target.value. Once again, that's a JavaScript standard. That's a convention. So you just need to get used to it. Cheers. Anything else, guys? No? Cool, fantastic. So you got the snippet on Slack. Make sure you spend some good minutes dealing through all these free questions. Once again, on Wednesday, we'll review questions number 1 and 2 after the hooks workshop. And yeah, and apart from that, Esteban is around if you need any support on Slack. And yeah, and let me know if you need anything, guys. So thank you for watching and see you soon. Bye bye.